Welcome to the Traveling Professors. I'm Professor Bob.
And I'm Professor Sherry.
And together, we are
the Traveling Professors.
Welcome to show number 100 of the Traveling Professors. Today, Sherry and I are going to take you on a walking tour of Florence, but we're going to make just one stop on our whole day's tour. We're going to see the Museum of the Bargello. Now, one of the things that's important when you're coming to see Florence, Florence is full of spectacular art. So if you're coming to see specific artists or specific works, you need to do some research and find out where they all are. Because quite frankly, a lot of people go right by the Bargello as they're going to the Uffizi or some of the other places. And you'll see this is the land of Donatello. But that's very important. Find out what you want to see and how you want to go about it. Because if you're coming into Florence, let's say for just a day trip, and you're going to try to hit this stuff up, you will go completely nuts. It's just impossible. The Davids in one museum, different things are in the Uffizi, they're all over the place. So beware, know what you want to see. Now as we look at the map, I need to give you a little background information of how lucky we were to have had an advanced scouting position. My oldest daughter Laura and her husband Matt spent 2 months in Florence before we went to Italy while he was finishing up his degree in art. So they were everywhere. They gave us all the insight. So that allowed us to do all this planning. In addition, I gave them several €100 to buy books of the collections in the various museums, which I nearly killed Matt since he carried them around all the time. So we knew what we wanted to do. In addition, we had time. We spent a week in Florence. We spent 5 days going to the various places in Florence and then 2 days going out. We used Florence as our base. So we went to Pisa one day and we went to Milan one day to see Da Vinci's The Last Supper. Now here's where we're headed. On this particular day, we walked from the convent. The first stop is the Bargello. And then after that, we went to the Palazzo Vecchio and then to the Uffizi. So there'll be a separate show on each one of those. And then we finished up the day by going to visit one of the great churches where everybody is buried. Whether they're really buried there or not, there's a tomb for them. So that's our map for one day, but we're going to break it up into 3 parts. Now, I talked about the Florence card before, and I got you some new information. The card still exists. It's more expensive. For 3 days, it's €85. Now you notice it still has a bus and the tram, and it still does that, and there's several other things. One of the things about this card, if you are a family, let's say you're a husband and wife and you've got 5 children under the age of 18, they're free. All museums are free. The children under the age of 18 accompanied by a parent. Now they also have something else. If you're going to be here longer, you can add another 48 hours or 2 more days on it. And depending on when you buy your card, that could be free. I just recently looked at the card and it had this additional item that you could have added on to it. But it would be part of your phone. If you decided to use the phone version of this, then all that would be included. If you bought the handheld card, like I like to do, okay, now that way I make sure my phone doesn't kill me, you'll have to add that on at the end. So it is still available. Here's a nice aerial view of the Bargello. Remember, it was built in 1255, but in 1574 it became the living quarters of the chief of police, the Bargello. And it was also a court and a prison and a variety of things. And then in 1859, it was temporarily the National Museum. You're walking down the side of it. You'll find a lot of the older buildings that have these devices on the side of the wall. So you can tie your horse up there if you're coming by horseback. Then there's a view looking straight up into that magnificent tower. Remember, these towers frequently were a military piece. Everybody who had a large house or an important household would defend their homes with a tower in them and then expand from and away from that. So you can view from here. And then just before we head in, here's the entrance. So the tower is off to the one corner, and there's the entrance. You show your card, and away you go. As we come through the door, we enter into the courtyard. Now, the courtyard has porticos on 3 sides with piers and arcading. They have a beautiful covered staircase that was built in the 14th century that leads to the upper loggia. And the walls of the courtyard are covered with all sorts of coats of arms that you'll see as we get a little closer. So in the center, you see the important object, which is the well. And again, all of the beautiful work. There's a lot of sculptures that are in this as well. Here's the view looking up to the upstairs, which we'll be taking after we've wandered around down here. And there's several places where you go into rooms and they have different sculptures. There's a view looking up at the people on the second level. And then here you can see the portico is really nice in this particular picture. And then here you see how they've moved statuary around, the view up at the top looking at the arches and the work on the arches. And then you see these various plaques. Now some of these are artworks from different areas that have been hung here, but there are a lot of plaques that have insignias, and those are the various chiefs of police and other officials of the government. Then here you have this fountain sculpture that's in different pieces. This is not for this particular area. It was put here for exhibition. So you see here's what it looks like in the front. Here's some of the detail of the figures. See where the water would have come out on either side. Woman bathing in the middle. And our usual dolphins we find in all sorts of artwork this time period. We got a couple of cannons down here. Actually 16th century cannons. Nice bronze sculpture. And then here we have Mary and the baby Jesus. A couple of apostles. Now it's time to head up to the second level. As we begin to go up the stairs, you notice the columns up ahead in the second floor. That is a loggia. And in there is an exquisite display of bronze animals. So here's one of the peacocks in bronze, and they have them all lined up in a row here, and different animals. Most of them are all birds. Here we have the owl and a falcon, and then we're going to enter into one of the rooms where they have all of the sculpture, and they're everywhere. When you live in a country like the United States, where the only Da Vinci is in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., and there are no Michelangelos, and you watch documentaries on Michelangelo and all of the other artists, and then you go into a city where they're everywhere. This is our first Michelangelo that we saw. This is known as the David/Apollo, ordered by Boccaccio Valori, who was the commissioner of the Pope's troops. However, it was never completed. And on the death of Valori, who by the way was accused of treason and decapitated by the order of Cosimo de' Medici I, this sculpture, together with the former's confiscated possessions, went into the hands of the Duke of Florence and is documented in his bedroom in 1553. Now the sculpture can be interpreted as Apollo in the act of taking an arrow from his quiver, that is by the artist Vasari. But it's also possible that it is David with Goliath's head at his feet. Now this sculpture, known as the Florence Triumphant over Pisa, this is a city-state system in Italy, and they're all competing with one another. This one is commissioned in 1565 for the Palazzo Vecchio on the occasion of the marriage of Francesco de' Medici as a pendant of Michelangelo's Genius of Victory. Bologna had only finished the stucco model in time for the prince's wedding, which is still in the Palazzo Vecchio, whereas this marble sculpture was carried out during the following decade and positioned in the palace in 1589 for another wedding, the wedding of Ferdinand I. Here we have this beautiful sculpture of the mother and child, obviously Mary and Jesus, but it could be just a mother and child. This is done by Ghiberti. We're not used to seeing him doing stone carving. We're used to seeing him doing the bronze castings. Now we come to a David. Now this is marble, and no, it is not Michelangelo's. This is Donatello's. This was commissioned by Maria del Florio in 1408. It's marble of David, represents Donatello's first work. In 1416, it was purchased for the Palazzo de' Signoria, where it was exhibited as a civic symbol of Florentine freedom. Now, bronze is really Donatello's thing, and this is his bronze David, and it has traces of gilding on it. This is the first full, round, nude statue made since antiquity, and certainly Donatello's most famous piece. It was commissioned Cosimo the Elder around 1440, and from 1457 it stood in the courtyard of the Palazzo Medici, first mentioned in 1469 on the occasion of the marriage of Lorenzo the Magnificent. After the Medici were banished in 1494, it was requisitioned by the government and placed in the courtyard of the Palazzo Vecchio as a civic symbol of the Florentine Republic. Showing you the front, here's the side. Frequently when you go to a museum, you can't get the 360-degree view, but you can certainly do it in most of the Florentine museums. And to give you an idea of size, here is the bronze with Professor Bob standing next to it. Here's another Donatello bronze. This is known as Love or Attis. In 1568, Vasari, in his life of Donatello, mentions this sculpture was in the home of Battista Doni, and it was supposed to be Mercury. It was purchased for the Uffizi Gallery as an antique bronze in 1778 and recognized as a work of Donatello by Luigi Lanza, an antiquarian of the gallery. Now, various attributes are entwined with the theme of Eros, freely interpreted from the classical art. Particularly the bizarre style of the breeches, actually portrayed with Attis, the god of Phrygius. The figure, which also has an enigmatic arrangement of the hands, combines features of an angelic beauty in the upper part and a feral nature, snakes and fawn's tail and winged feet in the bottom, with poppy seeds on the belt to suggest it was commissioned by the Bartoloni family, as this was their emblem. It looks very much like what are known as putis, or the little angels that you see carved all the time from the Renaissance. And there's a view of it from the back looking out into the gallery where a lot of the art is located. I should say one of the galleries. And there is the roof to that gallery. I believe you recognize this door, the gate or the door of paradise, as Michelangelo called it. But this was the result of a contest, and it was very common in Florence for artistic endeavors to be opened to a variety of people and then judged by the various guilds that were paying for it. You have this competition for what is known as the second door of the baptistry, and it was held by the Guild of the Merchants of Calamala in 1401. This is supposed to have been the event that inaugurated the Renaissance. Among those taking part were Lorenzo Ghiberti and Filippo Brunelleschi. And here are their two bronze plaques. Well, in the end, they were declared equal winners, even though Brunelleschi decided not to take part in the assignment. He decided he wouldn't follow all of the rules and did what he wanted to. The models were supposed to be submitted to the commission, supposed to have a bronze panel with a polylobed frame. It had to portray the sacrifice of Isaac, and those of Ghiberti and Brunelleschi are the only ones that still survive of the contest pieces. Ghiberti's composition stands out first and foremost for the balance between the figures and the space divided diagonally by the rock, and refined decoration on the altar which testify to the artist's exceptional talent as a goldsmith. There are also references to ancient art, especially in the nude figure of Isaac. Now, Brunelleschi's relief instead shows a single space which the figures, distributed on parallel lines, hardly fit into the frame. With the abrupt rhythm of the gestures, the artist accentuates the dramatic sense of the action about to take place, demonstrating a more modern interpretation. There is also reference to an ancient sculpting in the figure on the left that recalls the theme of the thorn puller. But don't feel bad for Brunelleschi. He is the one who's going to put the dome on the Duomo. To some extent, this was the work of art that I really liked the most, because to see the contest pieces and to know that the winner ended up producing the golden doors, which are, of course, polished bronze by Ghiberti, was just really, really something. On our way to see the chapel of the Bargello, we stopped by one of the many fireplaces in the building, just to give you an idea how large they were. And so there's sherry inside the hearth. Now here we are entering the chapel, and you can see it's a very nice chapel, pretty big for a relatively small building. Here's some of the seats, the choir seats. Here's one of the stained glass windows. Actually, this is the one directly above the altar. Now, as you get closer to the altar, you come to this crucifix in the plexiglass display. This is a rather unique and controversial item. This is a crucifix that's believed to have been done by Michelangelo. Now, Michelangelo only signed one object in his entire life, and that's the Pietà at St. Peter's. We look at this, and I've seen pictures of this where it's displayed as if it's very large. In reality, this is 41.3 centimeters, or 16¼ inches, by 39.7 centimeters, or 15.66 centimeters. And of course, it's Christ on the cross. Believed that he did it in 1495 when he was staying in the Augustinian monastery of Santo Spirito. It's there that he studied anatomy, and he studied anatomy by dissecting cadavers under the protection of the prior Niccolo Picelli. There's actually a legend that claims that this was some poor man that Michelangelo purchased his body so that he could crucify it to make sure he had everything correct. It was in private hands until 2004, when the Italian government decided that they would put it under the protection of the laws of Italy dealing with major artworks, and then in the end purchased it in 2008. So it's now actually part of the state collection, but it's here at the Bargello. And then here is the area where they have some of the ceremonial objects that would have been used on the chapel. There's a little baptismal fount area. Here's one of the walls with the Madonna. And then you look straight up at the top of the ceiling, and there is the ceiling work. So that is the chapel. Now on our way out, we stopped by to visit a couple of other things. Of course, they're Michelangelo's. What we see next is the famous Bacchus. Now this was done 1496 to 1497. It's considered one of his most challenging projects. As a young Michelangelo trying to copy the ancient statuary. This Bacchus is precariously balanced with its drunken gaze with the little satyr leaning next to his leg. This was not a popular statue. It was actually purchased by Cardinal Ruffalo Rosario, but he didn't really put it out on display. It ends up being in his garden at his Roman residence, and then it's sold to a Roman banker, Jacopo Galli, who then sold it to the Medicis, who purchased the statue for 240 ducats in 1872, and then they put it in the Uffizi Gallery in 1891, and now it's at the Bargello. And then we've come to our last Michelangelo. This is the Madonna and Child with young St. John. It's known as the Pitti Tondo. He had just finished the David in 1504 when a Florentine merchant, Bartolomeo Pitti, commissioned this Madonna, but he left Florence to return to Rome before it was finished. Vasari wrote about it, which is in 1550. It was in another man's collection, Luigi Guicciardini, but it was in Florence. And then all traces of the sculpture were lost until 1823, when the Lorraine government purchased it from someone and placed it in the gallery of the Uffizi. Now, I've mentioned Vasari on a couple of occasions. Vasari was a gentleman who kind of kept track of everybody's work. Vasari's book is entitled The Lives of the Artists, and it covers all the people from his time period as he tried to keep track of who completed what artwork, who paid for it, and where it continued to be traded to. One of the main sources that we have for figuring out who did a work of art and how it gets around to the present. So here is the front view, as you've been seeing. You have to turn it on the side to see, and after that we've been Donatello'd and Michelangelo'd out, and so it's time to go to our next stop, which is the Palazzo Vecchio. So we go back out one of the main rooms, downstairs, out the door. There's a shot of the Bargello as we're walking to our next stop. Sherry and I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please come by our YouTube channel at Bob Packett, and please subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much. I've been doing podcasting on history for over 15 years. I've got over 4,000 shows, and I've done CDs, which of course can be sent out as USBs. So if you would really like to get more on history for free, then come by my website, as you see here, historyaccordingtobob.com, and see what's there. So thank you very much again.